How did you get started on this journey?
Well, it all started growing up in Princeton, New Jersey, in a big family, um, going to public school. And we had this traveling creative writing teacher who had lost a hand in World War II. His name was Mr. Doherty. And he was amazing. He would tell stories about people in awkward situations in everyday life, like the kind of stuff everybody deals with being human. There we were, age 12, writing about an awkward dance, about someone who was mean, about heart. And I thought, all right, that's it. I want to be a writer. And I didn't really know how to be a writer at that point, but I made that decision at that early age. And then I entered, I went to college and I started working at newspapers to get myself going as a writer and built my career one small step at a time for the next several decades.
Yes, yes. I love that. I mean, that's creative thinking at its best and so young. I mean, thinking if we had, well, I haven't been in school in a very long time, but thinking if we had teachers that open up our children's mind like that now, um, that would be amazing. And I know there are some amazing teachers out there. Everybody don't start posting that I don't think teachers are amazing. But there's just a big, big difference because I had a teacher. His name was Mr. Green. He was amazing. But I don't know if I hear teachers like that that will allow and you can remember their name and say, this teacher had a part in my life. That is amazing. I love it. So tell me about your book.
Well, my book is a sort of a linear journey of how I explored the outdoors from age 3, when I climbed my first mountain, to basically now. And it includes a lot of awkward growing up situations where I didn't, girls, adolescent girls not liking their body, being in dance class, having people say you don't look right, and all that nonsense. And then I discovered a long distance hiking in my early 20s. So I describe these journeys. It's a narrative, it's you just roll yourself into the story. And then I had children. I got married and had children. I married a guy who I had done a lot of hiking with, and we still were speaking to each other, which is really nice. And we had 2 daughters. They're now all grown up. But when those girls were growing up, and they came home and would say things that boys had said to them on the playground, and said, girls can't do things, they're not strong. And I felt I had this obligation to teach them that you can do hard things, be uncomfortable, be cold, be in a tent, be in the mud, think you're not going to make it, and then come out the other end. So the book talks about some debacles that I had taking my daughters out, just me and the girls trips. So it was a whole section about that. Then I decided in my 50s I needed to go solo. So there's a whole section in there of me alone, backpacking, mostly in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, for us anywhere from 2 to 5 days at a time, having to deal with my own demons and everything. And then finally the book sort of wraps up where I come back around to realizing I want to be with other people again, and that my solo escapades had been a way to teach me more about how to cooperate in community, which we have to do in this life, So that it's a whole big journey. And so on the front there is a picture of it's a artist rendering of, based on a picture of me in the mountains. And then on the back is an artist rendering based on my girls in the mountains on one of those trips when I dragged them up
Yes.
to the Whites.
How did they like it?
Well, they were often very quiet and cooperative. They were interesting children that way. So like is not necessarily the word I would use. They were willing to go. They would get excited when they got to the top of somewhere. They went with me and my husband year after year. And so I think the best word to say is that they were willing to
Yes.
go through the experience. One of my daughters, when she was pretty young, announced to me, well, I realize some families go to Disney World and we go camping. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
thought, I hope social services isn't going to come and take them away from me.
Right. But what the goal was to teach them something completely different, the fact that they were coming home saying those things. And I hear those stories now with my 14 and 10-year-old, and it's very interesting how to keep girls encouraged and inspired and still
Yeah.
feeling strong and still feeling like a woman. It's a lot.
It's
So
a lot. I think it's hard to grow up. It's hard to grow up anyway these
yeah,
days.
yeah.
Um, but being a girl, especially being born into a female body and figuring out how you're going to navigate the world, parents have a real project. It's a project that we're doing with them.
It is definitely a project, and it's so funny that I'm going to say this on here. As I went through the holiday season and we celebrate Christmas, I had an aha moment the other day. I was like, I raised all of my kids wrong. I think I raised them wrong just a little bit. It's that reflection of like what you could have done differently and how you could have moved differently. And I now have an opportunity to encourage and do differently. And what I was meaning in raising them wrong is they wanted some really expensive gifts. And I was like,
Mm.
not doing that. But in the aspects of talking about what you're talking about, it's truly having that full on discussion and asking them how they felt about feeling maybe, I don't want to use the word to put words in other people's head, but feeling a bit inferior to some of the boys at school.
Yeah.
Um, but I
Well,
love that you started
you
that.
know, kids will ask for expensive stuff, and they're always going to ask. They're going to see if what'll happen.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like you responded the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. They got one instead of a whole bunch.
Exactly.
But life is very interesting. And I love the fact that you're utilizing, just being out and about in the wilderness. And I want to ask for you to tell me about your vision when you decided to make and write this book.
Well, initially, I did not understand what my vision was, and
Mhm.
then a bunch of people who helped me write better. I always try to get help. I have groups I show things to, people I trust. I had a writing teacher. You got to ask, and so they all said, "You don't know what this book's about." And I'm like, "What do you mean I don't know what this book's about?" But I didn't, and so I had to step back and think about it. And what that did was it led me back to my grandmother, of all things, realizing, watching her when I was pretty young, I adored her. She had severe osteoporosis. She was not allowed to drive a car. She had never done any of this sort of outdoor stuff. She had raised her own children and then her alcoholic sister's child who had been dropped off. She had to do that stuff. So in many ways, she didn't have freedom, the
Yeah.
kind of freedom that I fortunately really grew up with. And then I realized that this book was really my vision was, how can a woman learn who she really is, what she has to offer the world, what I have to offer the world. And my way of learning that was by repeatedly going back into the wilds and facing up to my own fears. And that became my message.
I love that. I love that. It's crazy how you have this idea and you begin to write or choose to dive deeply in and then have to pause to reflect. And I love that you went all the way back to your grandmother. Um, a very random question. What is freedom to you? What does it feel like to feel free?
Yeah, that is such a great question. Well, way I do define freedom in my daily life is that I have the ability to go where I want to go and need to go without asking someone else to take me.
Mhm.
So I'm not dependent on someone for doing errands. Um, Freedom is also earning my own money, contributing to my household equally with the person I live with, my husband. Um, because my so many women in my family did not have that freedom.
Yeah.
I, I think that's the biggest way I define freedom. because I watched my aunts and my grandmother have to ask for money,
Mhm, mhm.
asked to go places, and they needed permission to go do things. And I have a marriage that I'll say, I'm going up to the mountains in August. I'll be away for a week, and and he says, okay, um, that's freedom to me.
Ah, I love that. I love that. Thank you for answering that because it was definitely very random.
No,
You could,
I'm
when
not.
you said the word, I seen something change in you, and I was like, ah, what is that? What does that feel like? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And just wanting to hear the descriptive piece to that was amazing. Thank you. What personal adventure taught you the most about yourself?
Probably the solo. There were two solo trips I took. I took several solo trips, but there were two in particular that taught me uh, a lot about what I had in me.
Hmm.
And one of them, I I was out for 4 nights, 5 days in the White Mountains. And the first day I had to go 11 miles and I got rained on pretty early on. And it was June, it was late June in New Hampshire. So it was not winter, and it was not even spring anymore, but it was cold. And I got soaked and cold. And then when I got above where the trees grow, above the tree line, in a range called the Bonds, there's this mountain called Bond Cliff and West Bond. And you're going along and you look one direction and see one range and look another direction and see another range. And there was nobody with me. I
Yeah.
was completely alone. And I realized I was in trouble because I was really cold and the
Yeah.
wind was blowing, and I had to get to a certain place by nighttime so I would be safe. And I got turned around on one of the mountains. I got confused. I was so cold enough that I was not paying attention carefully to which way I needed to go. I had a mile left to the campsite. I turned the wrong way and started going back the way I had come,
Wow.
and I didn't realize it until I came to this very strange looking green rock I had seen on the way up that last mountain. And I thought, what is that green rock? That is the weirdest green rock I've ever seen. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't do this. How am I doing this? Why? I don't feel so great. My heart's beating kind of funny. And I realized I was dehydrated and I was cold.
Wow.
So I realized it later though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you're asking me, how did I grow through that? I think that's what you asked me. And
Keep going.
what
I'm
I learned was, I had enough experience at that point because we had hiked the whole Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine several years before. I had a lot of experience. I knew how to keep going. I understood, that you don't sit down and weep, that you just keep going. Um, but it was kind of instinctive, and I was, not. Ugh. And so I finally did get where I needed to go, and then later, I reflected back that I was doing that on pure instinct, and
Mhm.
I had the chance to see that in a situation like that, I was going to be able to draw on my instincts, and that was an amazing lesson to learn.
Absolutely.
Um, the other thing that the other solo trip experience was this creepy, lonely thing where I ended up down in an abandoned campsite in a wilderness area. Um, the White Mountains, all over the US, there are areas that are designated officially federal wilderness areas. And there are
Mhm.
all kinds of things they will not do in those areas. They will not allow structures. You can't have a lot of signs. It's supposed to be wild.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
there had been a campsite, but the Forest Service had dismantled it, which was creepy, creepy, creepy. There were like piles of lumber around, and somebody had tried to build a shelter, roughly using the stuff that was left. It was like a ghost town, and I'm alone there, and nobody else is there, and I was creeped out. I was just creeped out. I had this encounter with a large these. They're called snowshoe hares. They look like giant rabbits, and they're very elusive. And they come out at dusk because they know they're going to get eaten by something. And I'm like, ah! And uh, so I learned you can be really scared, like out of your mind scared, and you will survive. you know, I mean, I
Chris,
had this visitation from my dead father in the middle of the night. I'm like, Dad, and woo. And then in the morning, I kind of got up and bumbled over to this horrible thing that somebody had built to make a shelter, and I kind of crept inside, and there's like an old bottle of whiskey sitting in the corner, and I said, why am I doing this? Like out loud. I said, why am I doing this? And then I realized I'm doing this because I'm I'm going to get through it. And,
yes,
I am doing this because I'm living with my own choices. That's really what it was. No one else wanted me to do this. This is my choice. So I'm just going to get water. I'm going to make myself some coffee, and then I'm going to walk up that ridge. And
wow.
it was like a really freeing feeling, even though I thought, God, I can't wait to get out of this weird place.
Yes, yes, I tell you, that's a true example of overcoming fear because Christy Javanka would have found the nearest vehicle.
Well, there were no vehicles, but I know. I mean,
I wouldn't have made it. No,
well, you
and
might be
that's
amazed at what you could do, though.
yeah,
That's the
in my
coolest.
mind though, Christy. Oh
Yeah,
no, I mean, and just it sounded so much like a movie. I forgot I was on literally on a podcast. I'm like, what? And then what next? Absolutely not. But would I be willing? Absolutely, because I believe that some of the things that you're describing are often some of the things people say that they can't do, won't do. But those are the things that'll probably teach us the biggest lessons, not about the world, but more so about ourselves, like digging deep inside of a place that we had no clue in order to survive, but also not even just that, choosing to go. And that's what you did. You chose to go, you chose to make it through. And hey, that's courage at its highest, overcoming fear at its highest. Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's,
Thank you for that. I mean, I think courage. That's what courage is. It's managing fear.
yeah. And interesting enough, with the experiences that you've had, how can people overcome their fears and step into situations and nature-based challenges like you've done?
How can they try to do it the way I did, or how would I suggest
Yes,
anyone
how would
try
you
to?
suggest? Because see, your experience, and I believe having daughters that were willing to do what you've done, there's more of us like that. You know what I mean? And so these are things that are overcoming fear. And for some people, it's like, you know what? Pretty much what I just said. I can't do that. And that should not have been the mindset that I have. I think it's more so I cannot imagine doing that. So, to the people that are watching this, I could do anything. However, that was my first thought. So, Christy, please help encourage someone else to overcome their fear and to build courage.
Well, I think it's really good to identify when something out in the world that we encounter gives us elicits a strong reaction in us, like, oh my God, I could never do that. And I
Mhm.
think that if you find yourself saying that to yourself, you should listen to that. What do you mean? Why is that the thing that you said? I could never do that. There could be reasonable answers for why you couldn't do that. I mean, for example, if somebody has a really bad fear of heights, they probably should not
Right.
become a technical climber or become a bridge painter. But I would say that can be a clue to how to grow a little bit. And it also, fear can be a little bit related to what might become a passion. So somebody might be like, I always wanted to learn the guitar, but I'm afraid to try because somebody told me I had a tin ear, some ill-advised teacher, told me that. So I would say, listen to those little clues and then try something.
Yeah.
And in terms of the wilderness kind of experiences I have, um, go out with others. Find an organization like the Appalachian Mountain Club that publishes the journal I edit, and also was my publisher of this book. They have guided trips, they have guides, they teach people, they have really helpful books people can get. So try to learn a few things.
Yeah.
Learn how to use the gear that we need. Flashlights, tents, tarps, getting the right clothing, staying warm. What do you do for food? All that. try it, try a night out or two, and try it with other people, then try it by yourself. You know those old TV shows where kids would get all excited about camping and then they'd go camp in the backyard and then like by 2 a.m. they all go in the house.
Yep.
That's a great experience just to even make it to 2 a.m. and
Yeah.
know what it feels like to lie on the ground. Those things, that's how you try. And then when I would take the kids camping, of course, we couldn't go into the house in the middle of the night because we were miles away from civilization, and we had to keep going and get through it. And that's a good experience too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Step by step.
That's it. And just like you said, going out in the backyard and trying to camp and being close to home, that might be a great start. So, Christine, what are your future plans? What's next for you to inspire, encourage women to, dive into nature-based things, or just to, find themselves and be able to find power within themselves? What's next for you?
Well, I am working on a book about my New Jersey ancestors. And I am descended on my father's side from people who lived in New Jersey for 200 plus years and were small farmers. And they struggled, they didn't have a lot of money. My great grandfather was always selling off his stuff and then rebuilding. And so I'm trying to tell the story of people who have been forgotten in history, because once the really big farms came in down there and started doing frozen food and these giant blueberry farms and stuff, the small timers, that whole world of them kind of faded away. And I want to bring that back because I'm so fascinated with the power of ordinary people, what ordinary people can accomplish and how they survive. And my father, so my grandfather, it was the last one who was there, and he left when he got married. And then my father grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, and never experienced the farm, but he would hear about it from his dad. He never took us down there. They never talked about it, except to say, my father would say they never did anything down there. They never accomplished anything. And so I'm just curious. So I'm working on that.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the strength of women and men who were faced with marginal circumstances and had to find a way to keep going. And I've also started writing some fiction. I published my first fiction story this year about a trail runner in a small fiction anthology. And I'm going to experiment more with that and see where that takes me. I've been teaching as well. I do a little teaching at the University of Connecticut, and I look at my students. They're all learning how to be writers and journalists, and some of them are majoring in other things. And I always ask myself, what can I do? What do they need? How can I help them be better?
Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out your vision and becoming a Vision Pro yourself.